Okay, here we go. Okay. Uh, we are, get the screen here. Oh, I don't get the,
The agenda?
yeah, I'm just trying to, okay, here we go. Oh, you're back. All right. Okay, good morning, everybody. It's Friday, February 18th. This is your Senate Transportation Committee. And we're going to have a discussion this morning on leveraging maintenance and resources. And I guess we have a good relationship between V-Trans, Forest Parks and Recreation, Fish and Wildlife. So we have all the folks involved this morning. And we have Chris Eric with us. We have Michael Snyder. And we have Wayne Gamble with us this morning, I believe, all three. So who would like to start off?
Morning, Senator. I think
Okay, good morning. How you doing?
We wanted to have Wayne start.
Okay, let's have Wayne start. All right, Wayne, good morning.
Morning, all. For the record, Wayne Gamble, I'm the Division Director for Maintenance and Fleet.
The easy job at AOT, right? No problems there.
It definitely keeps me busy. So I just wanted to bring you all up to speed on some of the things that we're doing with ANR. ANR has been a great partner with us for many years, actually, and some of the things that we've been working on lately are us trying to help out with some of their maintenance work, as well as get them hooked up with contractors that we currently have for all the different activities we have. We're also able to do some of the maintenance work for them. For example, over the winter, there's certain areas that we're able to plow for them, roads into some of their parks. We're also able to do some of the areas for fishing. People want to get out ice fishing. We're also doing things, able to park places, plow parking places for some of the snowmobilers too. Some of those are a little bit more difficult because people are coming in and out constantly, and we have to keep our trucks on the road during the storm. So a lot of this plowing we're doing after the storm. We're also doing some mowing for them. We've done some stenciling for them, and we're also helping out with grading. The grading is actually a really good job for both of us. One, they get what they need, but we also get to use it as a training tool. Grading is kind of a special art, and we're able to get our people out on these roads, dirt roads with not much traffic, that we're able to get some training done too at the same time. So that helps out both of us. We also have been talking about lots of other things, where things are working well, where things that aren't, and then we work together collaboratively to try to resolve any things that may be difficult for either one of us. There's many other areas that we're touching on. We've been talking about EV purchases maybe together. We're expanding our fleets, so maybe we could do some purchasing together to help save some costs there. We've also been talking about charging stations. I also don't want to take all of everybody's glory here, so I could keep going, but charging stations, making sure that we're sharing maps where those charging stations are around the state. Maybe ANR could put some in areas that we could piggyback off from. We also shared things like our Wi-Fi codes for all our facilities. We have roughly 65 facilities around the state. They have Wi-Fi, so if any of ANR staff is out and about and they need a signal, they can pull into some of those areas. Joint contracting. A lot of our work is the same type of work that they need done, and if we're not able to do it because of resources, we can share some of our contracts. You've all heard of the job contracts, job ordering contracts, and the IDIQ type contracts. Those are the ones that maintenance use the majority of the time. We can also help out with culverts, design for bridges if they need bridges worked on or fixed or replaced. So there's definitely a vast way for us to work together and to hopefully save time, energy, and money. Does Chris or Mike want to jump in?
Sure, I'll go. Thanks, Wayne. For the record, I'm Chris Herrick. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Newly appointed gentleman from Fish and Wildlife.
It feels like I've been here 6 years, Senator.
And he lives in South Hero. He lives in South Hero, Vermont.
Also, just so you know, you may recognize me as from my previous position as the Deputy Commissioner at Public Safety. I think Wayne covered almost everything, and I'm not going to repeat it, except I did want to add a few things. I know yesterday I had some of my folks in talking about the Stay Connected program. And that's a really important program for us, and preserving our habitat and trying to keep it from getting too fragmented. And the work with AOT has been outstanding. I think the other area I would mention is Secretary Flynn and I talked and worked out an agreement where our wardens have access to AOT garage sites. So if they're out working, and they work all hours, as you know, Senator, they can get inside, get warm, use facilities if they need, and connect to the Wi-Fi. That may seem like a small thing, but it's a big deal when it's cold and nasty up in the Northeast Kingdom or other parts of the state, so they can get in. I think I'll just summarize my portion of this by saying that there's an overall management feeling and messaging down through the directors and all management and all levels that we encourage cooperation at all levels. So folks at the garage level and at the fish hatchery level and the regional level, if they can find ways to cooperate and save effort and money, we encourage that. So we're not maybe catching all of them here, but I know that is a message that I've communicated down since I started back in early November. And so with that, if there are questions, I'll take them probably, well, whatever your pleasure is, but I'll turn it over to Commissioner Snyder.
Didn't we see somewhere that you, any wildlife that you shoot or kill, you must eat them, or you got to sell the pellets or whatever? Is that something I just saw?
I think you're referring to the wanton waste bill that is up for third reading today in the House.
Okay, that's the one. Yeah.
And so I can certainly elaborate on that if you'd like, but we supported the bill as it's written. And it essentially is a wanton waste bill. And nobody supports the wanton waste of our treasure, our wildlife here in the state of Vermont.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any questions?
Thanks for your time.
Any questions from the commissioner this morning? Yes, Senator Pertzook.
Maybe a question that can tie dead wildlife to transportation. Is it Fish and Wildlife or AOT or both? I think maybe it's just AOT now I'm thinking about it, that collects dead, roadkill.
So that's a really interesting question, Senator. So AOT collects crash data through the crash program over in the highway safety area. But when it comes to roadkill, there's actually, I've discovered it's not as robust as I really like. And while our wardens can go into what used to be Spillman and is now Valcor, the CAT RMS system, they can tell you how many moose, how many deer that we're aware of. But what's interesting is AOT actually handles a lot of the critters that are unfortunately hit on the roadway. And so there's a team, and this is a great opportunity. I missed this, and thank you for bringing it up. There is a team being put together from my shop and AOT to come up with a coordinated and unified and comprehensive look at roadkill across the state and across quadrupeds and fur bearers and other animals that find themselves in that circumstance.
Right, because we heard yesterday about from the ecology group at AOT about some of the underpasses, the culverts that they'll allow more wildlife. So I assume Fish and Wildlife is involved in those efforts.
Very deeply. Did you hear from Jens yesterday?
Yes.
Okay. So he could go on for 3 or 4 days if you let him. I told him not to. I know you're very busy. But a group of Fish and Wildlife folks, myself included, and my wildlife director, and some folks from AOT, Andrea, and I'm trying to think who else was there. We did a field trip and we went and looked at some of these sites. There's one where the Little River comes into the Winooski, but we went all the way up into Craftsbury. And there are, in fact, some sites where you look at it and you go, I wouldn't want to walk through there either. And so it essentially gives them a choice. Either they go through here, which is not really all that appealing, or they just cross on the roadway. And it's really dangerous. 65 miles an hour, if they're doing the speed limit, is hard to get across. And if you have the cloven hoof on the asphalt, is not a real good way to get across. And so the program is really incredible with the cameras that they have out collecting massive amounts of data. And that's the thing I'd remind is all of these projects will be supported by data and the information that we're able to gather from the field to show that this would be a valuable project. And I think it's important to note, and I know they said this, but we have some areas in the state of Vermont where the habitat is extremely fragmented. And there's a few, there's a place up in Waterbury, they probably mentioned this yesterday, where it's one of the places where the greens are connected to the Worcesters and all the way up to Nova Scotia. New Brunswick. And so that's a vital and critical connection that we need to maintain.
Any other questions, Chris? Okay.
We also learned that if you find any salamanders, Senator Mazza would like to have one as a pet. I got the feeling that he was interested in that.
I saw one of the guys.
I can arrange for that.
In someone's hand, they said how pure that makes the water so pure. In fact, Jane, I think, said that you had one in your faucet years ago or something.
Yeah, back was there was the spring from the farm, and it had been there. Farm's been there since 1830s. And so it was nice to know that, and we used to turn on the spigot and a salamander on occasion would come out into your glass of water. But it was nice to know that is indicative of pure water. So
Sure.
I couldn't get escargot out of my mind after that.
Oh, well, they look a little different. Maybe they would be all right if we, bathe them in garlic butter and.
Yeah, anything's good with garlic and butter, Senator.
I don't know if I could drink the water when I saw that little creature in there.
Well, I know, but you're a city boy.
Yeah, but the waste of that little what do they call it? Goes somewhere, doesn't it? It must have waste.
Well, if you're on a farm, you deal with that all the time.
Okay. All right. Okay. Mike Snyder, we didn't forget you. Where are you this morning?
I'm right here, Senator.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well, thanks. I hope you all are as well. Happy to
God,
join
you haven't left that spot you were in yesterday or the day before. That scene behind you there. You're sitting right there again.
Seems like I've been here for a few years at this point. I'll admit. No, happy to join you all. Thanks. For the record, Michael Snyder, Commissioner, Forest Parks and Recreation. Wayne and Chris covered this quite well. I'll add a few bits here just for some context from the FPR perspective, starting with my gratefulness, particularly to Secretary Flynn, Wayne, and their whole team for kind of just the openness and the innovative kind of willingness to look for ways to leverage and partner. It's not new, but Secretary Flynn, I think it's fair to say, put a new emphasis and just really appreciate it. That's really important to recognize that. I think it's a model throughout state government, the way we connect and interact and share. And we need it. I guess that's the part I would mention, is that we have at FPR on state forests, state parks, we have about 600 miles of roads, forest access roads, accessing about 360,000 acres of public land. Use of those roads is important for the recreating public, for our forest management activities, stewardship and care of these places, for emergency access, and even in some cases, localized commuter use by Vermonters. And yet these roads really mostly began in the early 20th century, not quite as early as when Senator Kitchell's farm was established, apparently, but almost. And they were, and then with another pulse, so in the CCC era, the Civilian Conservation Corps era, and then another pulse in the early 70s corresponding with a pulse of state land acquisitions. Through all of those periods of road building, the roads for the forest systems were, they're under designed, I guess you could say. They were meant for use under frozen, snow-covered conditions largely. They do not meet most VTrans standards for specifications, particularly where bridges, culverts, some slopes, et cetera, are concerned. So it's a significant network. It has real importance, and it's a real challenge to manage, because now we're seeing increased use in all of those ways I mentioned. And I want to give a shout out to our staff for a moment here. We have foresters that have some experience, if not expertise, in road work, but they're foresters. We're really proud of how they, in the Vermont tradition, they kind of figure it out and they make it happen and they work with contractors. But the idea of having true professionals from VTrans helping here, not just with material or equipment, but with know-how, is very, very important to us. So I don't know that was touched upon. And so we have ongoing maintenance. Wayne mentioned snow plowing and some mowing. That's some relatively simple, straightforward stuff. It's hugely helpful. We're just getting started with it. Hope it can spread, mostly in District 5, the St. J district right now. Hopefully we can spread it around. So that's kind of an ongoing maintenance function that is important and really helpful. But there's other places. I think Wayne may have mentioned, we're thinking about exploring asset management, project management. And this is where the VTrans pros, this is their bread and butter. That's another place to leverage here that we're eager to push forward to, because to share, to benefit from that expertise. Most of our roads, they're not surfaced appropriately. They're not spec'd, and we are very busy with water quality issues, flood resilience issues, increasing demand for access. So we're replacing undersized culverts. We're replacing some culverts with bridges, which is a better approach. And when we do those things in particular, we can really benefit from the expertise at VTrans. It's just not I'm very proud of our field foresters and the way they get stuff done and figure things out. But these are public, assets. They're valuable. We need to have safety, water quality, aquatic habitat quality, and a reasonable approach for maintenance over the long time. So this is a long way of saying, or I hope a relatively short way of saying, this is really awesome and truly important. The last thing I'll mention is, I like to mention it to Wayne and Secretary Flynn whenever I can, is this, it sort of sounds an awful lot like it's a one-way street here. Really in our favor. And I want to make sure that we can offer something in exchange. And I always mention we have tree expertise, forest expertise. So where it comes to emerald ash borer mitigation, technical assistance to VTrans staff, we're happy to do that. Right-of-way veg management has been an interest for a long time. I've dealt with a couple secretaries of transportation on this. The idea that a lot of the interstate right-of-way in particular has grown up, and views are blocked, shading roads, making maintenance difficult, hazard trees. I'd say we're one big blow away from shutting down the entire system. And so we'd love to be able to offer an approach. We piloted something in a portion of the I-91 corridor, I think, Wayne, right, a few years ago, on looking, is there a forest management plan? And can we provide some assistance where perhaps you could generate some income? You could increase safety. You could sight lines, scenic values, the daylighting of roads. And maybe we could even generate some firewood for the garages or for low-income Vermonters, through that. There's a lot of opportunity for win-win-win here. And so I just like always mentioning that we're here and ready to give back to VTrans through our expertise if we can, because there are an awful lot of trees out there. I don't know. I mean, they have environmental folks, they have some expertise of their own. I don't mean to say VTrans can't do it on their own. We just want to be clear that we're ready to help and provide technical assistance in particular, or access to the network of loggers and truckers and all that we have strong relations with and may be helpful throughout, any contractors, et cetera. So I'll pause there. I hope that's helpful to just really putting a thumbs up on this and giving a little bit of further perspective from what's possible at FPR.
Thank you, Mike. Mike, how many acres do we have state forest in Vermont? I heard you say 300 or what?
360 plus thousand acres now in fee
Really?
ownership.
Wow.
That's state forests, that's state parks and wildlife management areas. So that's
And
in
do
the
they-
agency
do they-
spanning
do
two
they
departments.
Do they harvest logs out of these forests at any time, or?
We do. Yeah,
So
we
you-
have a timber program that is significant. I'll usually report on this in the Appropriations Committee. Senator Starr usually asks about it. I'll be in there this afternoon. But it's a several hundred acres are actively harvested under management plans throughout this portfolio per year. We generate a few $100,000 in income that goes back into these lands principally through those timber harvesting projects. And I want to just make sure everyone's aware, it's not just about going after timber, chasing wood. A lot of these are habitat enhancement projects. They have other benefits, other purposes, and other outcomes beyond generating timber income. It's important. It's one of the only things that pays out there. Everything else costs.
And who plows the access areas? Does everybody have a different arrangement? Does some towns plow the access areas, fishing access areas, or the state does?
I'll defer to Commissioner Herrick on access.
Okay, I was just a question.
So for parks and state forest access, it's a mix. Some
Okay.
we don't plow because they were never built to be plowed and they can't handle it. And the blacktop is
Right. No, I just
really-
wondering about the access areas. I just
Yeah.
curious.
But we contract with some plowers. We have some staff
Okay.
plowing, and
Okay.
as we said, VTrans is doing some plowing for us now.
Okay.
But I'll let Chris speak to the
Okay.
access
Yeah.
area.
And I know that there are some of those sites are plowed by VTrans as well. And Wayne can definitely speak to that.
So it's a combination of folks that participate. Okay,
That's correct, Senator.
just curious. Yeah. Questions for anyone this morning? Any questions, comments?
Senator, if I might, I'd like to piggyback on something Mike just mentioned.
Yep.
Obviously you've been up here, Senator, but if folks take a ride up to the islands and take a look, just before you get to the long stretch heading to the causeway, Mike, I don't know if you want to talk about that, the sand plain restoration project, habitat restoration project, but a lot of trees were taken out of there. Mike, do you feel comfortable updating that?
I mean, you got it. It's a habitat project in a really very significant and unique natural community type, the sand plains. And so Chris's folks have engaged. This isn't, the agency all participates, but yeah, it's a great example of a habitat project. That's the focus. That's the purpose, but it involves timber harvesting as well, as these are integrated projects. A great example of how our departments work together as disciplinary teams in the districts to check all the boxes, whether it's salamanders or timber economy.
What's the habitat? What are we protecting there?
So what you're going to see is it's expected to lead to regrowth for deer, so there's more browsing for them, as well as feeding areas for wild turkeys. New shrub
Oh my
development.
God, we don't need more wild turkeys.
Why? I want to get some for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, well, I'll ship about 50
Well,
up to
maybe
you, maybe 100.
This might help. We're also the shrub development could create new nesting areas for songbirds such as indigo bunting and eastern towhee and forest
I could go for
raptors.
that, but the turkeys are.
Well, we're going to have more raptors, so it's a give take.
What's the nest we have on the causeway? We have nests up on the poles there.
Right. So those are the and that was a project led by Steve Costello, who's a St. Mike's grad,
Yeah.
from
Are they
Velco.
what, Osprey or?
Yeah, that's right. But
Yeah.
there's also, we have peregrine falcon in there, and we also have there's at least one nesting pair of bald eagle, which
So,
I might mention was just delisted in Vermont, which is really
So-
a big. Go ahead, Senator.
Those raptors will take out turkeys.
Yeah, you really have a thing for turkeys. You want to come
Well,
turkey hunting with
Yeah,
me?
why
Senator?
are you
You know-
angry with turkeys? What is
No,
it?
actually, they say that farming practices have contributed to the proliferation of these large amount of turkeys, because much more corn is being planted
Right.
and the snow depth is not as great. So they're out there in the fields, in addition to so much feed in these ag bags that they open. And so you're going to see, it's like a smorgasbord for turkeys.
Have you cooked one yet, Jane? Have you cooked one yet? Or
They're
what?
all, look, no, I
No, I'm
don't.
sorry.
Here's what I'm getting out of this session this morning. I'm going to go to Danville with my shotgun on May 1st. That's where I'm going.
Well,
You're
I've also
welcome to.
learned you can stuff turkey with salamander, and that's really yummy.
Yeah, well, yes, Mike, you're more than welcome. And
Yeah.
you see the path right down from where they nest in the trees, through the field, down to the ag bags, and or where the corn has been planted. And you see them a lot in Addison County for years. Years ago, I think that was maybe where they were first introduced, but they've done very well.
Indeed.
It
You're
seems
right,
like you
you're
might have to
close.
put the bacon pans aside and get more turkey recipes, Senator Kitchell.
Well, my mother had two complaints before she died. One of which was the damn turkeys, and the second was the trees have grown up and were blocking her view of the White Mountains.
Well, Senator Kitchell, I
help
think
on both
Senator
counts.
Ingalls has an idea here. I'm happy to share with you my recipe for wild turkey schnitzel. It's a winner.
Yeah, thank you.
There. Okay, anything else? This was a very, it's just a good subject. We all have a little input on this one. This is fun. I have a half a dozen deer in the backyard every morning, eat bird feed. I love it. I throw some apples out there, but I don't get caught feeding me legally, so
Oh,
can't do that.
well, we have,
But you
actually,
broke
I
up,
found
Senator. I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, right.
I found a bobcat dead
Nice.
under my tool shed.
Ooh.
So we have bobcat, we have
Did you
bear.
cook it?
It's
You cook it?
amazing.
No, you didn't
What?
cook it? You didn't cook it, did you? No.
No, I reported it to the
Okay.
former commissioner.
Okay, all right.
Is it still there? Would you like some assistance?
I don't know where, that was over a year ago. I don't know
Okay.
where it ended up.
Okay.
I think my nephew gave it to a taxidermist, and they put it in the freezer until they got instructions about what to do with it.
You get too many turkey, Jane, let me know and I'll sell them for Thanksgiving, I'll tell them they're Vermont turkeys. That's all. Nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah, corn fed, organic, free range. I got the advertising already.
There you go. Okay, well, thank everybody for coming this morning. It's very interesting. It's always great to have you folks together, and I'm glad this working out so well. You all have some talent in some of the sections, and to work together, it's very beneficial to everybody. So,
So I'll get to torment the Commissioner Snyder this afternoon.
oh, do you? Oh,
Yeah.
take good care of him. He's a good man. Yeah, take good
I've
care of him.
saved his bacon on more than one occasion.
Well, good. He needs the help we can give him. He's good.
Mhm.
Yeah. He comes in he comes in institutions committee too. We take care of him over there. And just for the record, Joe Smith, yeah. Commissioner of Transportation, Joe Flynn and Eric both live in the same town, my district. So, okay, gotta be careful.
And for complete disclosure, we also own a camp together up in Canaan.
That's right.
And so Mike mentioned earlier that this seems like a very one-way thing. But what I offer Fish and Wildlife to AOT is I tell Joe where the deer and the fish are. So
Helps
if he
everybody.
chooses to pass that down, that's up to him, Wayne.
Okay, well, all right. Thanks again for everybody for showing up this morning. And we'll move, Jeannie, we'll move on to our next agenda this morning.
Thanks all. See ya.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Yep. Next item is National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program guidance. Alternative fuel corridors. We have AOT with us and Electric Vermont, Drive Electric Vermont. So are they with us this morning, Jeannie?
They are.
Okay. Welcome. And who would like to go first? We have Patrick Murphy or Dave Roberts.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee.
Morning.
Patrick Murphy here from VTrans. I've just got a few slides here to run through. So we've been to the committee a couple of times now. And each time I think we told you we're waiting on the guidance to be issued. So some guidance has now been issued, and we'll just walk through some of that for you today. Can you see this okay?
Yep, it's on the screen. Yep, it is. Thank you.
Great. So what we're talking about today is the IIJA investments, the federal infrastructure bill, and the plan to be able to roll out this fast charging infrastructure along the highway corridors. So Vermont is scheduled to receive just over $21 million over the course of the next 5 years. And last week, the guidance for this formula fund program was issued. And so we're going to just go through a couple of the really highlights for this and what are some key changes that VTrans and the state will have to grapple with. So the timeline for all of this is, we talked before about the alternative fuel corridor designation process. Last spring, there were a few segments that were designated as corridor ready and corridor pending. There have now been new guidance issued on what's required to have those segments be approved. But nominations are due May 13th for that. And then as part of this program, there'll be a state plan that's required, a pretty substantive plan to be able to access the funding. And so that's due on August 1st, and then the expected approval by September 30th. A state can submit plans earlier than that and receive approval on a rolling basis. So one of the key things here is that the program funding will be tied to these corridors. In the past, there hasn't been any kind of financial incentive tied to this designation process, and now the priority must be given to these corridors first, certainly in the first year, but until these corridors are deemed by FHWA to be fully built out, we'll have to be focusing our investments in those areas. So one of the key minimum standards that's been put in place is that each location along the highway corridors will continue to need to be within 50 miles of the next location. But the location itself will need to now have 4 ports of 150 kilowatts each. Many of the investments that we've made most recently have been on a lower scale. So a couple of ports of 50 kilowatts, and we can look in the next couple of slides on the difference, but it's a substantially higher requirement than prior rounds of the alternative fuel corridor designation process.
Patrick, what's the new federal funding I heard the other day? It's, I don't know how many billions of dollars they're going to do across the nation with locations for electric plug-ins. Does that affect Vermont in a different way or money or how's that?
So that's exactly what we're talking about here today.
Okay,
So it's,
okay.
so there's $7.5 billion in the
Okay.
federal infrastructure package.
All right.
5 billion of that is geared through this formula funding program. And then another 2.5 billion is for competitive grants.
Okay.
So we'll see on this slide here, I show the competitive grant funding, that pool of funding, the $2.5 billion, and half of that is for corridor charging, half for community charging. That guidance hasn't been issued yet. But what we're mostly talking about here is that $5 billion pot of funding. And so Vermont's share of that is just over $21 million.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good.
Sure.
Madison?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Patrick, on the requirement that it be along interstate corridors, how does that conflict or not with the Fed's prohibition of putting the chargers at rest areas that were built with federal funds? Is that, it seems like it's going to make it more difficult, or is it, or along the corridor could be with like 5 or 10 miles from an exit?
So the prior guidance in the corridor designation process was that it was within 5 miles of an exit or an intersection on the state highway system. That's now changed and shortened to 1 mile from a highway intersection or from an interstate exit. So there is a process to apply for an exception to that if there aren't, if there isn't commercial activity within that 1 mile area, or if there isn't electrical service present that would be needed to support that level of charging. But that seems to be reserved for exceptions rather than sort of a broad ability to be able to do it as we have in the past within the 5 mile radius.
And do you know if AOT plans on asking for an exemption to allow any of the rest areas on the interstate to have charging stations?
So we have not planned to do that because it's been made clear by the local Federal Highways Office that wouldn't be allowed. That prohibition is still in place unless we hear guidance otherwise. I think that would be a challenge to be able to gain an exception to that.
Have you? It just seems like there two requirements are in conflict to try to have it along the interstate corridor, especially in Vermont, where some of these interchanges are pretty sparse. There's not a lot going on, and so having it at the rest area seems like something that they might consider as an exemption up here if it's been asked.
So we're gonna be asking a number of questions for clarity on some of this new guidance, because I think there are definite points where there are certain contradictions within them, and that we'll have to just be able to work through over the next year. But that's certainly something that we can raise.
I think that's a great location. The rest areas, you got the space and everything. Yeah. You're off the highway. Good idea, Senator Person.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, but we always run into this problem that, well, you can put them there, is my understanding, but you just can't charge. So it only would have to be free. So we don't want to be giving away free electricity, especially when it becomes more common. So so hopefully AOT will be asking for an exemption where we have rest areas that have the electric capacity. Maybe maybe they don't have it. So that was going to be my other question. Has AOT looked at our rest areas and determined which ones would be able to have level 3 chargers at them?
I haven't looked at the rest areas because we did just get very recent guidance that said that would not be allowed unless, as you say, you just didn't charge for the electricity. But we can definitely do that. I did. There are definitely places along the interstate where we do not have electric service within the 1 mile radius, where we would need to ask for an exception to go out probably 2 to 3 miles instead. And there's definitely a handful of sites there that we'd be talking about.
Well, it'd be interesting to see if any of the rest areas would be, if there isn't a electrical service within a mile of the exit, but there is electric service at a rest area that's not too far from the exchange. It seems like a good thing to ask the feds to say this would be a good place for an exemption, and they do allow other small things to be charged. We have vending machines and things, so maybe we just say we're not charging for electricity, we're just charging for the coffee that they get when they charge their car.
That's good.
We can certainly look into it.
It seems like Michelle talked to us about this. It was not only the federal, but it's also, the capacity for to have cars parked there for longer periods of time, charging. And then the other was the 3-phase power requirement, because some of these rest areas are not exactly they're kind of in a
Off the beaten
open
path.
area. They're not part of downtown. They're not part of, they're kind of by themselves out on the interstate.
Yeah, that's why I asked about what the electric service
Yeah.
capability would be there.
Yeah.
But
They're all lit up with lighting at night, though. They got lighting, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think that requires that level of
Power.
charge.
Yeah.
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 And the time there, like if you with the fast chargers, if you get out, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom, and look at a little brochure in the rest area, that's about all the time you might need to just charge up and then move out.
Oh, it's
There's
convenient.
some-
I guess we're going to also, the bigger thing is just like with gas, and that is if we the how you do it so the state's not competing with the private charging stations.
Yeah.
I can see all these filling stations across the country. There's thousands and thousands of them. These mini stops. They're going to have to switch to something to generate traffic, because now they've got the gasoline. So I'm sure that's going to be a big issue nationwide. You got, like I said, hundreds of thousands of these 7-Elevens and all the others that they'll be figuring out something, because they got to get people to stop, and that's what their draw is now is gasoline. Go ahead. All right.
Sure. So some of the things where guidance has not been issued yet, we still don't have guidance on the minimum standards for the equipment. So we know that if the charging equipment there'll be at least 4 ports at each location, and they'll have to be able to charge simultaneously at the 150 kilowatt level. But we don't necessarily have the guidance on the Buy America requirements, which would have a big impact on supply, or on different payment methods that will be required. So there's a lot still to be worked out there. 10% of the funding each year is actually going to be set aside for what FHWA is calling gap filling grants. So for it seems like the intent is to look at what's happened over the past year, see where rural areas in particular aren't being filled in, and then be able to provide some extra money to make those locations work. The guidance still hasn't been issued on that and how that piece of the program will work. And then lastly, as we said, the competitive grant programs has not yet been worked out either. And I think a guidance is expected later, and potentially a notice of funding opportunity launched in the fall of this year. So this is just the equipment. You've seen this before, but just to orient you, on the right side here is the fast charging equipment. And right now, one of the changes in the guidance is that there only will be required the CCS plug, versus in the past, it required both the CCS and the CHAdeMO plug. Most of the manufacturers now are moving towards, if they haven't already, the CCS standard.
Yes, go
I
ahead.
see that.
Patrick, where's the feds on the payment requirements for these? We have talked in the past about whether credit card, payment, some kind of swipe or tap is required at the charging stations. Have the feds passed guidance on that?
No, that's one of those things that they haven't issued guidance on yet. There's general language in the authorizing bill, which signals the desire to have it as publicly accessible as possible, but it doesn't define that yet. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And then this just gives you a sense of, we've looked at this before as well, that the differences within this right side, the DC fast chargers. So most of the equipment that we have funded with state funds has been on this 50 kilowatt side of things. We do have a couple of locations with higher capacity, but mostly there have been 2 50 kilowatt chargers at the locations we funded. So this new requirement will push that minimum to 4 150 kilowatt stations.
Boy, I can see this changing so fast over the years. It's going to be, what we're looking at today, and every 6 months you're going to see some all faster and faster and faster. I think it'll come a time when you just pull up there and 3-4 minutes, you're all charged. The technology is changing so rapidly, but yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So this is a map of the currently designated corridors. So the dark green is corridor ready, and the lighter green, like this northern stretch of 91, is corridor pending. This doesn't, because of the way the minimum standards were written, this doesn't really impact us all that much, and it's not clear that that we will have a corridor that's ready to convert from pending to ready. I see a question from.
Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you remind us what the difference is between a designated corridor and a corridor ready and just a regular road?
Sure. So corridor ready in the past has meant they follow the old guidance of having charging stations within 50 miles of each other on the highway system, and within 5 miles of an exit or an intersection. Now what it will mean is this higher standard of the same distance between chargers, but it will require the higher capacity chargers and a higher number of chargers. And so no locations on any of the corridors that we've had designated really meet this higher standard. So what it means is, that we won't be necessarily in a position to convert any of these to corridor ready. Pending just means that it has some stations and plans for more. And so this move from the 5 to the 1 mile distance, it may result in a number of requests for us to get exceptions, and it might require some other solutions like renewable energy siting and tying in the battery storage options in cases maybe where electric services is too far away.
Senator Mazza.
Yes, go right ahead.
Well, I'd love to see Patrick at some point in time, and it's, we're going to reach all corners of the state eventually with all of this. I'd love to see whether it's this plan or there's other avenues of whether it's electrification or whether it's whatever. I'd like to see some plan sometime that starts with a low-hanging fruit and doesn't leave my district in the dust as the last place to get settled out, because by the time the new technology comes up my way, it's old and ancient. And but that's just an observation. That's all. I'd just like to see us not always being last, and maybe sometimes being first. And I don't see many charging stations up our way, but I understand population. I understand all of that stuff, but it gets a little old after a while of always being the last to receive anything that's new. And by the time we receive it, it's old. But just an observation.
If I could pick up on that, Senator Mazza.
Go ahead.
Senator Ingles, I think there's a real argument that we should focus on the more rural areas first, because the urban areas are probably going to have more private investment or just more electricity already in there. So I agree with your sentiment there. And I hope you're okay with me classifying your as the more rural area. You have the most rural district in the whole state. And that's where I'm most afraid cars are going to get stuck where they can't charge and they'll have to walk long distances. So I definitely support.
Would like to note, though, we do have a fast charge in Danville.
Mm-hmm.
Is that New Hampshire or Vermont?
It's definitely Vermont.
Okay, just check.
Uh-huh. And there is one in Bradford too. And interestingly, those are both, one is in Hannaford and Bradford. And I think those are private, GMP.
So thank you, Senator, for that comment. What I can share is that when there was a request for information on the design of this very guidance, the Agency of Transportation submitted a response with a number of different considerations for FHWA. And among those was making sure that the economic case would work for more rural areas, that we'd be able to have more support and offer more support to private sector entities to be able to build out in these areas, because that was one of our key concerns. And so there seems to be some, there's within the guidance, there seems to be some ability to increase the support to rural areas. And one of those things is the gap filling grants that I just mentioned. Another is that in certain scenarios, the agency will be able to fund not only the charging equipment and the installation costs, and even the renewable and battery storage elements that might be attached to that, but also 5 years of operating assistance, which will help, I think, make the business case a bit more inviting to private investment. When you're able to cover those first 5 years that are likely to be difficult to turn a profit, that can make it more inviting, I think, to private investment. So I appreciate the concern, and that will certainly be a part of this state plan that we're working on now.
Questions?
So this this map, Dave was able to put together for us, and it reflects on the guidance and kind of where we would need to generally locate new charging stations or upgrade existing stations. So we're looking at about 15 fast charging locations here along both the highway corridors that are deemed corridor ready and pending.
Patrick, that would be where the 21 million of the formula infrastructure funds would go to these 15 charging stations?
Not all of it, but this is sort of where the first phase would be focused. So because you have to, before you have flexibility within this funding source, you have to build out along the highway corridors and to meet those increased minimum standards of four ports with 150 kilowatt within the 1 mile of the intersections and between, with only 50 miles between.
What seems like, so looking at the 89 corridor there, if I can, because of the handout had a different map, so I can't see it as well on the smaller screen, but in between exit 1 down there in White River Junction, Hartford, and which looks like Randolph, there's, exit 2 and exit 3. If you have to have a charging station every exit, wouldn't you also have to have a star at those exits?
So the goal for the having a fast charger at every exit is a state legislative goal.
Okay.
What we're laying out here on this map is just how the federal funding can be expended at first.
So the federal, they don't have guidance for each exit, but just if you do it at an exit, it has to be within a mile.
That's right.
Okay. And so you're doing one in Randolph, but that's not going to meet the mile, so you're going to have to do a different one. My understanding, there's a fast charger going down in the village.
So there's a fast charger sort of more in the center of town,
Right.
Which is more than the mile away. But it's also the key issue there is just that the capacity wouldn't meet these standards. So we're not going to have 4 ports of 150 kilowatts. So we didn't need to add more infrastructure there.
So do you think you would be installing, like at the park and ride there, a fast charger in Randolph, even though there'll be one down in the village that's past the mile?
It's hard to say how. This is one of the tricky things about the guidance. So it's hard to say how we're going to work with those private partners that are in the process of installing or have just installed a station, and how we don't, as Senator Kitchell alluded to earlier, how public investment doesn't then kind of compete with what we've just installed with public funds and will be managed by private entities. So that's going to be a tricky thing to manage, and we may have to revisit certain locations within existing contracts to see whether we can either modify those or work within those to make sure that those sites are future proofed and able to, handle the expanded capacity.
Okay.
So this is to your point, as Senator Perchlik, this is kind of the estimate for an average station. And so this map here isn't going to eat up all of the, $21 million that over the next 5 years. The estimate here is $6.2 million. We'll have $3.1 million in this first apportionment. And so in year one, there's a little bit less because $300 million from the total pot was withheld to create this joint office of the U.S. Department of Transportation and U.S. Department of Energy. So in the first year, each state will receive a bit less than what we initially expected. In years 2 through 5, there'll be a bit more each year. So it'll be more like $4.5 million instead of just 4.25 spread over the 5 years. What's proposed for this year is taking $2 million of ARPA funds and matching that with another $4.25 million from the IIJA funding. And so when you kind of look at that, we could get pretty close within this next fiscal year to building out what's required under the federal guidelines. And then that would free us up in years 2 through 5 to begin to work away at our state legislative goals for charging stations along each exit, and then our equity goals, as Senator Ingalls had mentioned, to make sure that we're locating in all areas of Vermont. So that's kind of to give you a little perspective on how we see the initial round of funding going, to be able to kind of build out what's required, get that kind of done with, so that we then have more flexibility to build out according to the state plan that's developed. So this is just giving you a sense of what's eligible. I said before, renewable energy and battery storage solutions are eligible costs under the guidance. Existing facilities, the upgrades to those are eligible. This operating assistance in limited circumstances would be eligible, and that's when really the market really requires that additional assistance to expand to rural areas or otherwise underserved populations. And then the development phase activities. So the plan itself is an eligible expense, but then there are a lot of different elements to it, including the forecasting for EV ownership and the mapping activities that have to happen to be able to coordinate with where electrical services and permitting and design issues as well. And then lastly, the data sharing that's going to be required as a part of the reporting requirements to the federal government. So we tried to just provide some sense of what we would need for 2025. So the Climate Action Plan has goals that we just kind of revised a bit downward from 44,000 vehicles to 27,000 vehicles by 2025. And this is looking at, there's a tool on the alternative fuel data center, which allows you to estimate kind of what is the mix and volume of charging that you would need to support this level of adoption. So when you look at our current numbers, we have 6,585 plug-in electric vehicles registered in Vermont. The kind of calculus is that we would that level of adoption would require 330 workplace plugs, 262 public level 2 plugs, and then 69 DC fast chargers. And so we're in good shape for the current level of adoption. We have about far more public level 2s than might be required, and about the range of fast charging that we would need. But to support 27,000 in 2025, we need to do a lot more, and that might result in another 30 plus locations to be able to support that level of adoption. Now, having said that, we have even higher numbers for 2030, and this investment is a rare opportunity, I think, to be able to build out our network. And so we'll have to make really the best use of it so that we can reach those even higher goals in 2030.
The interesting part is going to come when it's how is it going to be competitive, or is one place going to charge 3 cents more and the other place is 5 cents more? That's going to be an interesting discussion how that's handled, because people will drive distances right now to save 3 cents on a gallon of gasoline. Just wonder how that's going to affect electricity between private and federal and state. But I don't know how they're going to determine that one. That'd be tough.
Yeah, the pricing will be difficult to sort out, particularly for some of these areas that where the payback period is going to take a lot longer than
Right.
others.
Yeah.
So some of the other project considerations within the guidance that's been issued, there's this goal of projects being completed no later than 6 months from procurement, which is quite fast and faster than any of the projects that we've had to date. That's going to be even more challenging, I think, as demand for all of these charging units rises with the amount of funding that's available to every state. And as we continue to see different supply issues, and that would be compounded if there were any kind of inflexibility on the Buy America requirements. I see a question.
Yes, any questions? Okay.
Senator Ing.
Senator Mazza, I
I'm sorry,
apologize.
I can't see it. Go right ahead.
I was muted. I apologize. Who's installing these? Who's doing who's the vendors that are installing these units? Are they bid out, or what's going on? And the reason I ask is we saw one of our garages installed their own unit for $34,000, a level 2 charger for $34,000, I think it was. And we're better than 10 times that as far as on these estimates, as far as on that. And is the state installing these, or are we hiring vendors to install these charging stations?
We would be hiring vendors to install these. And I think it's key to note that the required equipment is substantially faster than a level 2 charger. So these are not only fast chargers, but they're super fast chargers in some cases. So the 150 kilowatt chargers, they might cost 75,000 a unit or more. And I say or more because as more and more demand grows across states, and if we continue to see limited supply, then that will push prices upward. The super fast chargers, like the 350 kilowatt, could cost up to $140,000 or more. So there are different also challenges that come with the installation of those because of the electric service requirements, and so they're going to be expensive in every location, and possibly more expensive in the harder to reach areas.
I don't see any way the private enterprise would ever be attracted to jump into any of this. I mean, it's yet to be determined what a return could possibly be, and at these levels, this is just subsidy after subsidy after subsidy, and we better hope the federal government keeps on printing money, because we're never going to get to the level where we need to be if we have to fund it as a state.
So some of the other project considerations here are all sort of in line with what our interagency work group on EV charging has dealt with in the past, and continues to work on with the different private partners that are currently building out the network. So there aren't many surprises there. I know that in prior meetings, it has been raised questions about the siting of chargers, and there is some guidance there, and will be more guidance on issues around parking configurations, access, and things like if you have vehicles with trailers attached to them and the like. So there will be future guidance on that. This just is from a prior slide, is the kinds of things that we were already working on with Drive Electric Vermont for a statewide plan. Now that guidance has been issued, we will begin to build in those additional elements into the plan, so that we make use of the effort that's already ongoing, and then be able to build in some of the new requirements around certainly public engagement. This gives you a sense of the required engagement with not only other state agencies, but with a number of different community and labor groups and transportation organizations, other municipal and governmental agencies as well. So quite a bit more work to do, and particularly on the public engagement piece. So once we have sort of a draft plan by March, we'll then begin to open it up for feedback among all kinds of different groups, and taking into account equity considerations for sure, and the labor and workforce considerations that will need to be included in this plan. And so this is one of these additional elements that we will have to work through. There's the President Biden's Justice 40 initiative, of where 40% of investments should be geared towards prioritizing areas, rural areas, underserved, disadvantaged areas. And there are some key questions here that we'll have to work out in the development of the plan. One of them is just that initially the map you saw in a prior slide of where we have to locate, generally, where we have to locate the infrastructure in the first year is pretty prescribed. And so we'll have to have some significant public processes here to invite feedback from various parties. But our hands will sort of be tied in the first year of where we must locate the investments and the areas that we'll have to address. So the key questions here are how those fast charging facilities that are deployed will actually benefit the communities in which they're located. The 1 mile guidance from an intersection or a state highway intersection or a interstate exit, it clearly serves the traveling public for longer trip making, but it doesn't necessarily, it won't always be compatible with a dual concern about making sure that these investments support local businesses. And I know that that's been a concern of the committee in past discussions. And then how these public investments are planned to complement rather than compete with existing infrastructure. So we've put different chargers in the ground. There are other projects in progress. How do we make sure that the new upgraded infrastructure that we deploy in the next year or two and beyond isn't actually reducing the impact of those prior public investments and kind of whittling away at the prior business cases that those investments had. So those are some questions that we'll grapple with and conversation with all of our partner agencies within state government. So I'll pause there and open it up for more questions.
Any questions? A lot to grasp this morning, and any questions from the committee members?
Well,
Go right ahead, Senator Perchik.
Patrick, is there a deadline for the infrastructure spending? Like the ARPA money had the 2026 date. Do you have a deadline for when you need to spend that 21 million?
I haven't seen a deadline in the guidance. I know that was a concern among a number of respondents to the request for information, that, you know, there's so much unknown, and there's supply issues involved, and how much money really can get out the door in the first year and beyond. So I haven't seen any hard deadline, but that might be forthcoming. There is a very ambitious, as I've noted here in the presentation, an ambitious goal of having projects get built out within a 6-month period after procurement.
Another, just one note, I noticed that the slideshow you showed is different than the slideshow on the website. So I don't know if you updated it, you might want to send the updated version to Jeannie.
Yes, yeah, that was just updated this morning, and so Jeannie will get the updated version for the website.
Okay, does Dave Roberts, would you like to join us for any input this morning?
I've been listening in. I'm just here to provide support if a question comes up. And just for the record, Dave Roberts, I'm a senior consultant and the Drive Electric Vermont coordinator at VEIC. I think you all have covered the issues pretty comprehensively. One thing I guess I would mention, two things I would mention just to reinforce or bring up. these 150 kilowatt DC fast charger requirements are over anything that the state has done to date. The most the state has done is 150 in some of the locations that have been funded, but most of them are 50 kilowatt. So it's a significant upgrade, and it's understandable that the federal government is looking to get that level of charging as part of this national network that hopefully will make travel by EV much more convenient across the country. We may want to consider some of the 350, the faster fast charging in a number of locations in Vermont as well, because as Senator Ingalls mentioned, the cost for these in general is quite high, and especially in some of the rural areas, it's going to be difficult to have a viable business case, anytime in the next several years, I would anticipate, just given the costs involved. So it may be to Vermont's advantage to really try to leverage these funds while they're here. Another thing that Patrick touched on a little bit is the use of, the feds are only requiring the CCS plug fast chargers, which is what the majority of automakers use, but Nissan historically has used the CHAdeMO plug. It's the other non-Tesla plug. Nissan nationally has about 165,000 Leafs on the road that use that CHAdeMO plug. It's about 7% of the US EV market to date. In Vermont, there's about 900 Leafs, and it's been about 13% of the Vermont market is Leafs. So historically, the state investments have included both CHAdeMO and CCS plugs. And I think, speaking personally, that it would make sense for the state to continue to provide some support for the CHAdeMO plug for Leaf drivers who are out there. They're still selling brand new Leafs that have CHAdeMO charging. And at least right now, there's no adapter. So a Leaf driver would not be able to use those CCS plugs. So I think we may want to think about going beyond just the minimum guidance of the feds and providing some CHAdeMO, at least, for the next several years while there's still a good number of Leafs on the road. And I see Senator Perchlik.
Yep, go ahead, Senator Perchlik.
But Dave, I'm assuming somebody can make an adapter pretty easy. That doesn't seem to be that complicated. It seems like a much easier fix and then taking up a port for a technology that's clearly on the way out.
I've done some reading on that. It's apparently not as simple as you would hope. It's simple for level 2 charging, but with fast charging, there's communication happening directly between the vehicle and the charging equipment. Apparently, there's some potential like hardware locks that happen with the CHAdeMO plug on the Leaf while it's charging. So you need to have a sort of mechanical locking system on an adapter. So it may be possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's not as straightforward as you would hope.
You think that's right. You think in the future the power companies will be capable of providing all this extra power, and probably they will, because it's going to happen over a period of time. It's not going to happen tomorrow morning that you're going to, but we only got 6,000 cars today, and there was 3,000 a couple of years ago. So we know it's going to grow, but will there be a lot of solar invested in this, or do you think it'll be just power companies?
I think it's important to remember that most EV drivers are charging at home overnight, and the utilities have programs to encourage that with special rates for off-peak charging. And in general, what I understand, and it may be helpful to have utilities come in to provide more information on this, is that they really have, for the next many years, no concerns about being able to handle additional charging needs, as long as it's happening during those off-peak periods. I think these fast chargers may present some unique challenges, especially if we're doing a number of the very high, the 350 kilowatt fast chargers, several of them. We want to make sure that the siting is very closely aligned with what utility capacity looks like in those areas. And so that's certainly something, as we develop the state plan, we're in touch with utilities, and we'll continue to work with them on those needs. And it may be that in some cases there's a need to build in some battery energy storage to kind of buffer that really high impact to the grid.
Because we also know there's more trucks. If I read nationwide trucking companies are getting involved. They're producing more electric trucks, and I'm sure they'll draw a lot more power naturally as we go coast to coast with the trucking industry. It's a lot of uncertainty, but I'm sure it'll be worked out. Questions up there? Anybody? Do I see? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Senator Perchlik, with being the residential expert, because the two vehicles, electric, and Jane not be able to plug her horse in. Do you have any problems with plugging in? Do you have no problems with the two? Because you have not only two different cars, but two different makes of cars as far as GM and Ford. Do you run into any problems?
No, it's really just those Nissans that use that CHAdeMO or CHAdeMO as Dave calls it. Or the Tesla, but the Tesla people are fine. Nobody's worried about them. So it's really that Nissan plug, and I think there's some other Japanese manufacturers that use the CHAdeMO plug.
Mitsubishi historically has, but
there's not a lot of those.
Very small. Yep.
Yeah, so that's the only problem. I mean, the only problem I've had is pulling up to a station and not having the station not being operational. You know, luckily on the fast chargers that I've been to, like on the interstate, when I've driven down to Boston or New York City or something, there's like 8 or 10 ports. And one time I went and I had to go to like 3 ports before I found one that worked. But luckily there wasn't a lot of people there, but I can see as it gets more crowded, and I've heard in some bigger population areas on certain weekends that they can be filled. You can show up and all 10 slots are full. So if there's a couple that aren't working, that's a problem.
I'm sure AAA is going to have to be involved in this issue, because they're going to be getting a lot of calls. I mean, over the years, they're going to have to be prepared for this. It's not our issue, but I'm just curious about, they're going to be called. Like gasoline is pretty easy, but they're going to have to figure out a way to.
They do have little mobile charging stations.
Oh, do they? Oh, okay. I didn't know that. All right. Yeah.
And your plugs are the same on each car? They're the same? Yep.
Yeah. Almost all the plugs have moved to that CCS.
The Tesla has to put out their own plugs. They have to do their own charging stations all over the country by themselves. Wow.
But they do have an adapter. So I assume that's for the fast charger as well as the level 2, Dave. Yeah. So Tesla people have it made. That's why we're not worried about them.
Oh, okay.
I can offer to Senator Engel's question about sort of home charging capability. We have heard from some Vermonters, particularly in some of the more rural parts of the state, where the distribution network near their home has a transformer that may need to be upgraded to handle sort of higher power associated with an EV. A lot of people are getting electric heat pumps that may be drawing more power. So that is an issue that you may be hearing more about. I think the Climate Action Plan talked a little bit about, some of the grid upgrades that may be necessary on that front, especially in more rural areas. So I wouldn't say it's common, but there certainly are people out there who maybe have a hard time getting a level 2 charger installed because of either the local grid constraints, or within their home, they may have an older home with a smaller electric panel, not enough room to add a charger without some additional work involved there.
Dave, we're going to be happy with internet first, and then we're going to get the chargers after that. So we're getting there.
Well,
yeah, hopefully we'll do the chargers faster than we're doing the internet. That's been too slow. And then Dave, we see commercials for like the F-150 Lightning that show it powering the house. And I remember early on the vehicle to grid was talked about a lot. I don't hear about it as much anymore, but I see those ads. So is that something that's on your radar, or something that we need to address, or that when you're talking to utilities and other stuff about electric vehicles, or is that something more about the vehicle? Can you say anything about that?
Sure. So that would be, Ford is doing a lot of promotion of that. It's a really big battery in the F-150 Lightning that's due out hopefully later this year, getting into production. It can be used for what's called vehicle to home, which would just be, the power goes out at your house and can run sort of critical refrigerator, other lighting, other things in your home for maybe even a couple of days if you can sort of turn off the things that aren't very important. And then there's vehicle to grid, where it's actually feeding power back onto the grid. Vehicle to home is a little bit more straightforward just because you don't have as much to deal with the utility side of things. They are working on it. Green Mountain Power has a pilot vehicle to grid system installed at their facility in Colchester. So it got a lot of air a couple of years ago, and now it's kind of been on a slow simmer, but it has, the technology has been advancing. Volkswagen is just making announcements that their ID4 is going to have an update that it'll be able to do some vehicle to grid. So it's certainly on the radar. It's not something that is in widespread use. There are still some concerns about how it may impact sort of battery warranty and performance over time, but it seems like those are getting worked out. So it's a work in progress, but definitely something to watch moving forward.
Any other questions from Dave? Anything anybody would like to add? Dave or Patrick, anything else you'd like to add at this time? Covered a lot of territory this morning.
I have a question if we have a little time. Since Dave, you spend a lot of time thinking about electric cars and what's coming out. What electric car are you most excited about that's going to be coming out in the next year or two?
I don't, there's so many. It's, we do our best to keep track, and it's with the chip shortage and supply chain issues, there's been a lot of announcements, but it's kind of hard to know when they're actually going to show up in quantity at Vermont dealers. So like Subaru has a partnership with Toyota. They're coming out with an all-wheel drive, all-electric vehicle called the Solterra. They just opened reservations for that, and I think they basically sold out in a day because unfortunately they're not able to make too many of those and ship them to Vermont, at least not yet. So that's one that's pretty exciting, just given a lot of Vermonters' preference for Subarus. The Hyundai Ioniq 5 is just starting to show up at dealers, and that's great range. It's going to have over 250 kilowatts of charging power capability, I think, which is unusual for a sort of a more affordable all-electric vehicle. So that's one that's interesting. And the Kia EV6 is another. Kia and Hyundai are sort of sister companies, and they share a lot of the same platform. So the Kia EV6 is just starting to arrive at Vermont dealers. And so, there's definitely cause for optimism that these new all-wheel drive, which is the strong preference of many Vermonters, starting to show up.
Senator Kitchell, what model are you buying?
She's out cranking her Model T, I think.
Okay. Yeah, she left us. Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments this morning? No, I guess not. Well, I thank you, gentlemen, very much for the good coverage this morning. And it's an interesting subject, and it's going to be continuing to be interesting for many years as it moves along. It's a brand new subject for us, but it's going to be a growing one, that's for sure. Like I said, just a few years ago, there was a couple thousand, and now you're up to 6,000 or whatever it is. And that's just a small increase in comparison to what's going to happen in the next few years. It'll be a big, interesting subject for years to come. Okay, well, other than that, I think we're all set. Thank you very much for showing up this morning, and we'll probably be in touch again. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jeannie, you want to